Good day, everyone. This is Shantanu Ganguly, CEO at Strategink, and on behalf of Strategink and CXO Digital Pulse, I welcome you today to join us together with Gavin Selkirk. Gavin, welcome to India. Gavin is the Vice President and General Manager of SysDig and based out of Australia, and he's visiting India, and thanks for sparing time for CXO Digital Pulse, this interaction. Gavin, at the onset, I think I would request you to tell us a little more about how SysDig is innovating for your customers globally and in India.
Gotcha. So first of all, Shantanu, off the back of ESCON 2025, it's been a wonderfully enjoyable 2 days. I have to say that you guys certainly know how to put on a top event here. So as I said, thank you for the last 2 days. So innovation, of course, it's something that all technology businesses want to focus on. And of course, every business will do it differently depending on how engineering teams and development teams are set up. What I like about SysDig and what I like about our business is we are true believers in the voice of the customer. And so, we're a startup, so we're still growing and scaling, and certainly that's the case here in APJ. What our business has recently done, as most mature businesses do, is that we've set up customer advisory boards. Now, I have to be careful here so that I don't lose my job, but in international businesses and in a lot of US businesses, they take a sort of global approach to that. As guys like you and I know, innovation means very different things depending on geographies. And so for us at SysDig, I'm delighted that we take a very geographic-based approach to innovation and listening to our customers. You and I were talking earlier today, and you asked a wonderful question, which was the differences in markets between a market like Indonesia, which is a hyperscale market with a lot of youth and early adopters of technology. Very, very different to a mature market like Singapore and ANZ. And of course, my favorite location, because I'm here in India and different itself. So yes, so from an innovation standpoint, I like that our businesses use that voice of customer to push that messaging back into our engineering teams, because we all know that if engineering teams are left to their own devices for too long, they might develop their way to, putting us on the moon, and maybe that's not the outcome we're looking for.
Fantastic. I think I'll summarize this as DevSecOps being in your core DNA, and that's how you are approaching and engaging with customers. That's truly terrific, and that I think it brings in this whole concept of agility at the forefront.
Yeah,
that's how I would want to truly take that point out. Tell us a little more about India. How do you see India and its growth story in context of APJ as a market?
Yeah. So again, you and I were talking earlier today, and we were talking about the vast differences between our careers, working in hyperscale businesses and then startups, as we've both done. And India presents some very unique challenges based on scale. I always talk about India as a DevSecOps market. I think that's a fair way to describe large parts of it. One of the conversations that is often had inside startups, because of course, when you are doing new market entry into a location like India, it's complex. It's complex in any market. And sort of a little bit at my peril, I'm quite direct when I'm talking to executive teams and boards, and especially private equity companies. And I've said for a long time that there are certain companies that have realized the benefits and the challenges of expanding and growing and scaling in India. And I've used the term that organizations will ignore India at their peril. Now, boards and investors may not always like to hear that, but if you don't have an investment thesis that, as I said, there are two hyperscale markets in APJ. Mm-hmm. One of them is mainland China, and one of them, of course, is India. There is at some levels a reluctance, especially in the private equity world, to go into mainland China because of the geopolitics. And so that says you have to be successful in India. As I said, there are companies 12 years ago hyperscale businesses that started investing in earnest. And whilst, of course, from a GDP standpoint, India is still dwarfed by Europe and by the US, you have to look at the rate of change and the rate of growth and the rate of scaling. And of course, if you look at GDP, that as a reference point, India has moved up 5 positions from 10th to 5th in just the 2 years.
Okay.
So whilst it may not have the implicit scale, directionally, as I said, and given the scale of the market, businesses can ill afford to not be successful here in India.
Fantastic. Appreciate that. And then, as you rightly said, scale, skill, and diversity of different industry verticals, the right blend of enterprise versus digital native. So India gives you all this spectrum to play around, and together with that, there is large geographic spread. So, and then each geography has its own vertical or specialization centric distribution, which is an opportunity to tap into.
Definitely.
Coming to the evolving geopolitical, I would say, state of the world and the countries that we live in, and this is some dynamism which is not in direct control of us as business leaders, but we must learn and adapt to cope into it and still find opportunities to move forward. The concepts or nuances of regulatory compliance has become increasingly critical, and sometimes the cybersecurity or data protection leaders are having little sleepless nights or anxious moments to increasingly new charters or demands from the regulatory agencies or authorities, and then all this in context of evolving threats or risks, prevailing situation. So in such situation, as you and I interact with these user industry leaders, I think a key expectation they have from solution platform providers is, okay, to what extent the platform elevates my compliance position or posture. Do you want to touch upon a bit on this and tell our audience as to how SysDig makes its customers reasonably ready or forward moving in terms of the compliance posture?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Shantanu. So the fear of God goes into most people when you start talking about compliance and risk. These are challenging problems that require challenging solutions. You know, for SysDig, we recognize this, and a little bit before my time coming into SysDig, knowing that the risk and compliance piece was only going to continue to be an current inflection point in scaling in terms of how organizations look at it. You know, we made some acquisitions, and in particular, we made an acquisition of a compliance and risk company called APAC. We started embedding that, and that was sort of 3-4 years ago. But that's a simple way of having a technology solve. There are, of course, other less complex sort of risk and compliance problems that vendors have to tackle. And of course, one of those that requires a significant sort of lens of investment is data sovereignty. And you know, for us, and part of your question was talking about India, you know, recently SysDig moved to having a local public cloud data center here in India.
Excellent.
We like to think that we have a superpower, which is that we want to continue to provide an on-prem consumption model for our customers. But of course, we all recognize that compute is going to continue to move to the cloud, and we need to address that. So yeah, as I said, from a technology standpoint, for a lot of the compliance and risk pieces, you can address that sometimes with acquisitions and development, but the data sovereignty piece, what's happening with that data. And in fact, you know, you might remember I made a point today that IDC has just come out and said that 80% of surveyed leaders are saying that compute and storage is going to move back out from the cloud to an on-prem private SaaS or some other consumption model, which is only going to continue to make things complicated.
Appreciate. Thank you. Thanks. I think that very, very reassuring, and that's a very well thought out and detailed strategic approach towards helping customers sort of tap into compliance ready state solution from a platform standpoint. So I think we'll try to wrap up with a bit of dialing into the future. So as you mentioned in couple of nuances of your previous answers, one of the growth strategy of large software companies is also through mergers, acquisition, and then further innovating on your current platforms. So how does the future look like for Sysdig? What do existing or prospective customers expect in terms of product roadmap, solution roadmap, or new innovations from Sysdig in next maybe 6 to 12 months?
Sure. Gosh, there's so many different ways that I can answer that question, Shantanu. It's a great question. So let me sort of tackle the sort of growth thesis piece first. So when we look at APJ, we look at it as a business from a standpoint of what are our priority 1 locations, what are our priority 2 locations, and of course, not unique to Asia Pacific and Japan, but without certainly a wide, deep and broad partner ecosystem in many of our markets, you are going to fail. And so as part of that investment thesis, you have to look at those markets that may lend themselves to being partner-led. And certainly we do that, as you and I and all of the audience would know, that India, of course, needs many facets of all of those pieces. So the growth piece for us, fortunately, we have the freedom and we inside of our business that we get that Asia Pacific is not one big market that has one go-to-market that's going to work, as I said, in terms of that sort of investment thesis piece. The innovation piece, and I, of course, not being a public company, you have a lot more freedom to talk about mergers and acquisition. I have no clue, well above my pay grade, Shantanu. I've certainly been in businesses that have been highly acquisitive to go after revenue. Businesses either go after revenue or they're going after a differentiation through technology. So I'm sure that there are people in our business looking at that. I always joke around a little bit, and getting back to that investment thesis piece specific to geographies, I always say that the investment thesis for international businesses are US 1, US 2, US 3, EMEA, and then Asia Pacific and Japan. And I say that jokingly, but of course it's driven by the size of the markets. And most international businesses would have a contribution ratio of sort of, or expectation, US 50%, EMEA 40%, and Asia Pacific 10 or 15%. That's how we think about the business in terms of growth, investment, headcount, and how we, as I said, overall, how we would expect the market to behave in terms of contribution.
Terrific. And I truly wish both in India as well as in APJ, Sysdig continues to sort of exponentially grow its customers, both mine existing customers adequately, expand your portfolio, acquire as many new customers as part of your growth strategy. And the great news is that while everybody appreciates cloud native has been your core competency, so delighted to learn that in India you have put in a sort of regional hub and sort of footprint in terms of getting into the private space, helping on-premise or private instance customers also tap into Sysdig's portfolio and solution. That gives more choice and more sort of opportunity to engage with Sysdig to the customers of India. So Gavin Selkirk, Vice President and GM APJ Sysdig, it's a delight talking to you on behalf of CXO Digital Pulse customers or viewers. Thank you again for visiting India, for being in ESCON 2025 and for talking to us.
Thank you, Shantanu. It's been our absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Best wishes.